A very quick introduction. As most of you probably know, we are the national public body for theatres in the UK and a statutory consultancy within planning. We are, someone needs to mute themselves. We are a charity and the only organisation that provides life and support to all of the UK's theatres, whether they're historic or modern, subsidised, commercial, volunteer or local authority run. And we do this because we believe people should have access to live performance in theatres wherever they live, in whatever part of the country and in whatever community. Theatres have such a positive role to play in placemaking, contributing to people's well-being and the local economy. And that's why we support Theatres at Risk and the communities and local authorities and theatre operators who are working together to bring those theatres back into live performance use. Over the last 17 years of the list, we have saved more than 80 theatres, and so this work does actually work, but it only works when there's partnership between all the stakeholders, locally and nationally. So I won't be saying any more because you'll be hearing lots more from other speakers. We are really privileged today to have both Arts Minister Lord Parkinson and Shadow Arts spokesperson Barbara Keeley MP. It's really encouraging to have cross-party support for the value of theatres in their place, in placemaking and communities, and also for the partnership working that many of you on this meeting are doing to really make sure that we have thriving theatres at the heart of our communities. So first up, I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Lord Parkinson, Minister for Arts and Heritage and DCMS Lords Minister.
Thanks very much, John, and hello everyone. Thank you for letting me join and inviting me to say a few words to you today. As Minister for Arts and Heritage, I have the tremendous privilege of visiting theatres in both aspects of my job. So I'm reminded not only how central theatre is to the lives of millions of people for the performances that it puts on, but how the buildings themselves are at the hearts of communities right across the country. So as John says, I think it's great you've got both me and Barbara today demonstrating the non-party nature of our support for theatres. This isn't and shouldn't be a party political issue. As lots of people on the call today, I'm sure, can attest, the best results are delivered when we work across the divisions, whether that's party political or the divisions between local and national government, to find sustainable solutions to help secure the futures of theatres with plans that are rooted in their communities and look after them for generations to come. That's why the advocacy of the Theatres Trust, which everyone at DCMS is very proud to work with as one of our arm's length bodies, is so important to ensuring that theatres remain open and accessible for everyone. In the last financial year, the Trust provided nearly £300,000 in grant funding to 38 theatres, but despite that help and all its fantastic work, there's still work to do, as the risk register reminds us. Let's start with some of the good news. While this year's register stands at 38 theatres, I was very pleased to see that 3 theatres have been removed from the list and that no additional theatres have been added. I think that's a great tribute to the work that the Trust is doing. One of the venues leaving the register, Walthamstow Granada, will reopen later this year as Soho Theatre Walthamstow, and the Soho Theatre, which will be operating the site, is set to receive over £600,000 in public funding through the Arts Council's new national portfolio. I was pleased to see in your Theatres magazine that a number of venues on the register have been helped by support through direct funding from the government. The second round of the Levelling Up Fund, which was announced last month, included a number of culture-led regeneration projects. Amongst those was East Lindsey Council's bid, which includes Spilsby Sessions House. And while it's not funded directly, Morecambe Winter Gardens will benefit from the successful Levelling Up bid for Eden Project North, because that's located directly opposite the theatre, and will help to boost visitor numbers and unlock further funding and regeneration. Meanwhile, the government's Towns Fund is helping other theatres on the register. Theatre Royal Margate is benefiting from £2 million of Thanet's Town Deal award, which is of more than £22 million, which will help with urgent repair works and help make the theatre fit for purpose. And Doncaster Council has allocated money from its town deal to fund the second phase of a viability study for Doncaster Grand. I wish all those projects the best of luck with the exciting work that is enabling. Investment in theatres has also increased through the Arts Council's latest investment programme, both in terms of the number of organisations supported and the volume of funding, which is now more than £110 million each year to nearly 200 organisations. Over 12 million of that will go to new joiners to the portfolio in parts of the country which haven't always had their fair share of funding. That includes a range of organisations such as the Shakespeare North Playhouse in Prescott, Next Door But One in York, and the Claybody Theatre in Stoke-on-Trent. And of course, that's on top of the unprecedented £1.5 billion Culture Recovery Fund, through which over £270 million was given to support almost 700 theatre organisations across England in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. To help our recovery from COVID, the 2021 budget increased tax reliefs for theatre as well as for orchestras, museums and galleries until 2024, an important boost for the cultural sector to keep producing the content that we are world famous for. These additional tax benefits are worth almost £250 million, and I know that they've helped theatre companies bounce back more quickly from COVID. I've asked our Commissioner for Culture, Lord Mendoza, who was very involved in the Culture Recovery Fund, to help us aggregate the data so that we know exactly the impact that they've had. But the data on the theatre tax release, which we're very proud to have introduced in 2014, is very clear. Since it was introduced nearly 10 years ago, almost £400 million has been paid out on over 5,000 claims, representing an incredible 17,820 productions. But in spite of all this good news, I know all too well that the last couple of years have been challenging and that the challenges remain. That's why the government remains committed to supporting theatres right across the country. We know that the cost of energy prices remains a significant concern for organisations in every sector of the economy. That's why the government delivered an £18 billion package of support for businesses through the Energy Bill Relief Scheme, which included vital support for arts venues, including theatres, when it was most needed. Although the current level of support will conclude at the end of March, it will be replaced by the new Energy Bills Discount Scheme, which will ensure that organisations will continue to receive support until March 2024. Just a quick word on heritage. As you know, the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill is currently making its way through Parliament. That contains several proposals to strengthen heritage protection within the planning system. The Theatres Trust has raised aspects of the bill with colleagues here at DCMS, and we're all very grateful for the helpful discussions that you've been having as that bill goes through. So thank you for letting me join you and say a few words today. Thank you for the work that you all do across the country to support our theatres, and best of luck over the 12 months ahead.
Great, thank you so much, Lord Parkinson. Really appreciate your comments and your words of support, and for outlining government's measures to help the UK's theatres. I'd now like to introduce our keynote speaker, Barbara Keeley MP, Shadow Minister for the Arts and Civil Society. Over to you, Barbara.
Thank you, John. And it's good to be here today at a time of such existential challenges for theatres, to focus on the excellent work of the Theatres Trust in the face of those challenges. And the launch of the 2023 Theatres at Risk Register could not come at a more critical time. Since I was appointed to the role of Shadow Minister for the Arts in March last year, and I was chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Classical Music for many years before that, I've worked to understand the scale of the challenges facing the arts sector. So later, I want to talk about the opportunities and threats to the theatre sector, and to talk about where more could be done or different policies pursued to protect and support theatres. But in the face of those current challenges, it's very important to recognise the successes of those local authorities, theatre operators and community groups that are working to revive theatres which have been under threat of closure redevelopment, or severe decay. And the Theatres Trust has played a crucial role in those successes. The grants advice and statutory planning roles provided by the Theatres Trust are essential resources for the UK's theatres, as is your advocacy work on behalf of the nation's 1,100 theatres. I've been struck by the power of the Theatres at Risk programme to bring together different groups to agree a vision for the future of their local theatre and to leverage funding. The importance of such partnership working has come through very strongly. I was glad to see the positive impact of local authorities described in the cases of all 3 theatres that have been removed from the at-risk register, following crucial work and input from the Theatres Trust. Century Theatre, Swansea Place and Walthamstow-Granada all serve as excellent examples of what can be achieved when communities, arts leaders and local authorities develop a vision together. But we do know that local authorities have come under great pressure over the last decade. Cuts and the austerity measures of the Conservative-led governments since 2010 have forced local authorities to make unenviable funding decisions, and we know that arts funding has been impacted. I looked into this recently with the House of Commons Library, and we found that local authorities in England have been forced to reduce their spending on theatres and public entertainment by more than 1/3 in real terms since 2010. And the biggest falls were in the Midlands, the North West and the South West. This real-term downwards trend in investment can be found across other funding streams too, a point to which I will return. Now, the Theatre Trust tell us that the real-life impact of these local authority squeezed budgets is being felt by places like Clare Hall in Haywards Heath, Netherton Arts Centre near Dudley, and the Tameside Theatre in Grays, which were all added to the Theatres at Risk register last year. For some of these theatres, it is positive to read that councils are engaging in consultations to determine the best way forward so that the theatre can survive in whatever form is deemed best by the communities it serves. Now, the case for funding theatres properly cannot be overstated, and nor can the benefits that theatres bring to local areas. Theatres like the Lowry and Salford, where I'm an MP, not only put on shows that delight and inspire, they are also vibrant cultural and community hubs which contribute to community well-being. They boost local businesses and they provide jobs. As a Salford MP, I know that the work of the Lowry Theatre there has a real impact on the lives of local people. To give just one example, the Lowry and Salford Young Carers Service commissioned a new production from the theatre company Long to shine a light on the untold stories of young carers in Salford. This play completed a 27-venue national tour. The work engaged 200 young carers and has had an impact on the lives of over 2,000 children, young people and health professionals across the UK and abroad. Now, community outreach and education projects like these are run by theatres across the country, but when their financial security is at risk, it's understandable that delivering these programmes for communities comes under threat. Many theatres have received a cut in their Arts Council England National Portfolio Organisation funding, with producing theatres like Oldham Coliseum, the Donmar Warehouse, Hampstead Theatre and the Watermill Theatre all removed entirely from the programme. Just last week, Oldham Coliseum announced that it would be cancelling its entire programme from the end of March, with no certainty as to whether its curtain will ever rise again. Now, people in Oldham and visitors from Greater Manchester will be deprived of the planned stage adaptation of Ken Loach's film I, Daniel Blake, and families will no longer be able to look forward to the Coliseum's famous Christmas pantomime, which previously welcomed 35,000 people each year. What that means is that the town of Oldham misses out on the extra business those visitors would bring. I have raised the case of the Oldham Coliseum a number of times in Parliament, and it's good to see that my colleague MPs Debbie Abrahams and Jim McMahon, together with the leader of Oldham Council, have pledged to fight for a thriving, innovative Coliseum theatre production company for Oldham. It is important that we focus on the difficult funding context that theatres find themselves in. Across all pots of funding, real terms investment in the arts has fallen by around 12% since 2009-10, and that includes the Cultural Recovery Fund. More recently, these funding challenges have intensified. Theatre leaders have told me that they are still struggling in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic. I know that audience numbers remain depressed nearly 3 years after the first lockdown, as people only return to busy places very cautiously, and their buying habits have changed. Theatres outside of London's West End have 17% fewer seats filled than before the pandemic, which is hurting revenue from box office and on-site hospitality. And recovery from the impacts of COVID is being hampered by last autumn's economic chaos and its effects on spending behaviour. The cost of living crisis is changing how people spend their money. The Audience Agency has found that the vast majority of people are scaling back on entertainment spend outside of the home as a direct result of financial pressures from higher energy and food bills and higher mortgage payments. Of course, high living costs also affect theatre staff. Arts leaders have told me about their difficulties in recruiting for roles, while talented staff may leave the sector to work in better paid organisations like film. Then there are the rising internal bills. I understand that restoration and construction costs are estimated to be up by as much as 30%, affecting set building and efforts to retrofit or repair buildings. On top of this, several theatre leaders have told me that their electricity and gas renewal quotes are more than tripling. But theatres have been left off the list of emergency and trade-intensive industries that will receive enhanced government support for their energy costs. And theatres will also be hit in April when theatre tax relief is reduced by 15%. Now, those two issues, reviewing energy bill support for theatres and reviewing the tapering of theatre tax relief, are two areas where the government could help the theatre sector more. We need a government that will prove through its actions that theatres and culture will be valued, protected and supported to thrive. Despite the challenges I have outlined, communities and the Theatres Trust have done excellent work campaigning for our theatres. Since the Theatres at Risk Register was first published 17 years ago, more than 80 theatres have been restored, revived, or had a suitable replacement built. And that's a brilliant achievement. I want to congratulate everyone who has been involved in all those projects. But an unprecedented 10 theatres were added to the register last year, which now sits at a total of 38 theatres at risk, with nearly 9 out of 10 of them being outside of London. And I must mention that one of the 10 theatres added last year is the Victoria Theatre Salford, designed by theatre architect Bertie Crew, and I want to thank the Trust working to save that theatre. Now, the theatres on the register are at the heart of our communities. They are an essential feature of our high streets. They are a leading force in creating our cultural identity and the UK's international standing as a world leader in the arts. Theatres are a fundamental component of creating the buzzing, vibrant places we in Labour want to see. But theatres must be valued and supported if they are to be sustainable and contribute to placemaking and regeneration. So Labour in government will back the theatre sector, including through a £700 million scheme for organisations to invest in energy-saving technology to lower their bills and reduce their costs in the long term. Labour will grow our economy and usher in a clean energy revolution. Labour will ensure that the art skills and talent pipeline can thrive with a creative curriculum and pathways for young people who do not usually get into a career in the arts. We must make sure that we have the right policies in place to spread the opportunities of the arts across our country, and theatres are integral to this. So thank you for having me here to speak today at this launch, and thank you to everyone for the vital work you do in theatres and for campaigning for the survival of these treasured institutions. And just as I finish there, John, I noticed that there's a comment about the Minister and the Shadow Minister not being available to answer questions. If anybody does have a question for me, perhaps they put it in the chat and you can send it on to me later. I'm always happy to take questions in that way, or whichever way we can make fit into the time.
Great, thank you, Barbara, and thank you for your encouraging words of support for our work and for sharing your perspective on the issues facing the UK's theatres. I think one thing we can all agree on is that theatres are vital for supporting their communities and for placemaking, and it's really encouraging to hear both yourself and Lord Parkinson speak in support of that. And the message from today's event is, I think, as well as the challenges, the real challenges that we are facing, there's so much that we can achieve through partnership working between local authorities, communities and operators. On the point of questions, absolutely. If anyone does have questions for Barbara or for Stephen, we will happily forward those and I'm sure they will get back to you. It's more of a time issue. We just don't have time to kind of do lots of Q&A in today's pretty packed agenda. I don't want you to miss out on what the panelists are going to be sharing with us as well, talking about the work that they've been doing to save their particular theatres. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Janina McBride, who's our Theatres at Risk Advisor and the Programme Manager for the Resilient Theatres, Resilient Communities Programme, who's going to give us a bit more detail about this year's list.
Thanks, John. So hi, I'm Janina. I'm the Theatres at Risk Advisor and Programme Manager at Theatres Trust, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how theatres are added and removed from the list, run through some of the key issues affecting theatres on the register, and let you know about changes to our register for this year. So here we have an image of all 38 theatres on this year's register. The list is updated annually and is our way of highlighting and supporting the theatre buildings under threat and at greatest risk across the UK. This map just illustrates the spread of the theatres throughout the countries, 33 in England, 3 in Scotland and 2 in Wales. It also shows the position of the 3 theatres we're removing from our risk register marked in orange. Last year we saw an unprecedented 10 theatres being added, and this year we've removed 3, all for positive reasons, and there are no new additions to the list. So just to briefly introduce you to the 3 theatres coming off our register. Firstly, the Granada in Walthamstow, which closed in 2003. And this image is of the auditorium when it was still at risk. The building was bought by the council in 2019 and Soho Theatre has come on board as the operator. Following considerable restoration and redevelopment, it will be opening later this year, primarily as a comedy venue. Next, Swansea Palace, which closed in 2006. And has been in very poor condition and steadily deteriorating. Bought by the council in 2020, they are sensitively restoring the buildings for offices with potential for community events and small-scale performance. And finally, Century Theatre, which is the quirky mobile theatre built after the Second World War, which now has a permanent home in Leicestershire, owned and run by the local authority. And I'll leave my colleague Claire to talk a bit more about these theatres and their exciting futures in our final panel session. So before I talk a bit about the issues and trends that we're seeing affecting theatres on our at-risk register, I just wanted to explain a bit about how we put the register together. So as a team, we get together to review the situation nationwide, and we use 3 criteria for assessing whether a theatre is added, removed, or remains on the list. Firstly, not only must the theatres on the register be considered to be at risk in some way, but they must also be excellent examples of our theatre heritage, which we describe as its star rating. They must also be important to their local community, and we believe have the potential to return to live performance or community performance use, so have community value. Every building is given a score between 0 and 3 in each of these categories, and then these scores are added together to give a total risk score up to a maximum of 9 points. To be included on the list, a theatre must score a minimum of 4, with at least 1 point in each category. The assessment method means that the theatres at the top of the list are not just those at the greatest risk, but they are the theatres of the most architectural, cultural and social value, and the buildings with the most potential to be returned or retained for live performance use by their community. So although we've had no new additions to the register this year, and we've had 3 theatres removed, the situation is not as positive for theatres at risk and the wider theatre sector as this might indicate. One of the first key issues affecting theatres is the ongoing challenging funding landscape. Theatres are still struggling in the aftermath of the pandemic, with the impact of the cost of living crisis and rising energy costs bringing a new wave of challenges. As we've heard, audience numbers outside of London's West End have fallen on average by 17% compared to pre-pandemic levels. Several theatres have had their Arts Council England funding cut entirely under the new National Portfolio Organisation announcements for 2023 to 26. Creative Scotland had its funding cut and has delayed making decisions about its regularly funded organisations. Before the pandemic hit, there had already been a downturn in funding available for theatre capital projects, but that situation worsened with many of the key funders having reduced grants due to diverting funds for COVID survival support. Coupled with rising costs, this has made it even harder to progress with restoration projects. We've seen theatre construction costs rise in excess of 20%, and some theatres have reported an increase of over 30%, so value engineering is becoming a necessity. And we're aware that we may need to add other theatres to our list in future if they're unable to secure funding for urgent repairs and essential upgrades. There are, however, still a number of opportunities for theatres. Spilsby Session House, who we'll be hearing from in our first panel session, has just received £3 million through East Lindsey District Council's Levelling Up bid. Whilst not directly funded, Morecambe Winter Gardens, shown here, will likely benefit from the successful Levelling Up bid for the Eden Project North, which will be sited opposite the theatre. The UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is the successor scheme to the European Regional Development Fund and the European Social Fund, is another scheme that can benefit our theatres. Burnley Empire, who we'll hear from in our panel session later, and Morecambe Winter Gardens have both submitted shared prosperity applications to their local authorities for funding to help with urgent repair works on their buildings. We've just heard that Morecambe Winter Gardens was successful and a decision on Burnley is due imminently. The government's Town Fund has also benefited other theatres on our at-risk register. Theatre Royal Margate will receive £2 million of Thanet Council's Town Deal Award, and Doncaster Council has allocated a small amount of money from its Town Deal grant to support the Grand Theatre in Doncaster, shown here. And we'll be hearing more about Doncaster in our first panel session. In less welcome news, Dudley Metropolitan Borough Council is planning to use its Town Deal money to demolish and develop the site of Dudley Hippodrome and construct a new university hub in its place. So local authorities are currently the largest funder of the arts in the UK and will be an essential lead or partner for regeneration projects. A key part of our work at Theatres Trust is working with colleagues across the wider theatre and heritage sectors to advocate for culture and to help put in place conditions to help theatres flourish. And local authorities have a vital role to play in this. The 3 success stories of theatres being removed from our at-risk register this year have been made possible largely due to the positive contribution of the local authority. There are also examples where it's the lack of council support that has led to the theatre being at risk, and Dudley Hippodrome being the starkest example. We also recognise the huge financial challenges faced by local authorities, with budgets squeezed more each year, and arts often bearing the brunt of this. At Thameside Theatre in Grays, the council declared the complex surplus to requirements and had begun exploring a sale or disposal. The council was then declared bankrupt last year, and although government financial support has been requested by the council, it has been advised to sell off assets and the theatre remains at risk. At Clare Hall in Haywards Heath, Mid Sussex District Council had originally planned to permanently close the venue, which led to the building being added to our at-risk register last year. Following community pushback, they've since commissioned a feasibility study to look at options for Clare Hall, which Theatres Trust has provided feedback on, and the resulting report suggested that the council take forward 2 options to market. And at Theatres Trust, we continue to advocate for the value of the theatre provision and offer support to the council as it investigates and develops viable operating models for the building. Overall, local authority support is as much about providing funding as it is a willingness to cooperate, support funding bids, intervene with repair notices to prevent listed buildings from deteriorating, and working to develop creative approaches with partners. So on to the final trend to discuss, which is changes in ownership. We've seen several of the theatres at risk subject to change in ownership over the last 18 months, as private owners and developers continue to divest themselves of more problematic sites. For example, Streatham Hill Theatre, shown on the left here, was sold in quick succession, firstly to a property group and then to a church group, coming as a major blow to everybody who wants to see the building return to live performance use. On a more positive note, Spilsby Sessions House Limited, shown here on the right, successfully took over the ownership of the Spilsby Session House building in March last year. We'll also be talking more about Spilsby's journey and recent success with levelling up in our first panel session. There are also several theatres on the register that are council assets for disposal, with Borough Hall in Greenwich being advertised on the open market, and community asset transfers continue being discussed for theatres such as Thameside Hippodrome. And finally, it's worth noting that the government's Community Ownership Fund has now expanded its criteria to remove the requirement for the asset to have been in community use in the past 5 years. This could be a potential funding option for community groups wanting to take over their local theatre at risk, particularly those closed for many years. The Groundings Theatre Trust has submitted an application to help fund the purchase of its building and hopes to hear whether this has been successful in March. Competition for the funding is fierce, however, and unfortunately Ramsbottom Co-op Hall Restoration Trust was unsuccessful in its bid to fund the building last year, but we remain optimistic that it can still find a means to secure this important building. So we recognise that the theatre sector is facing a challenging time, and we are here to help with advice and support to groups, owners, operators and councils to find the best use and way forward with their buildings. Despite the challenging environment, the opportunity that these buildings offer is immense. And theatres are important in shaping our communities and neighbourhoods, and live performance venues and historic buildings hold a pride of place within them. We believe restoring and maintaining theatres is worth the investment through the positive impact it can have on the local economy, increasing footfall and encouraging spending locally, acting as an anchor for regeneration and drawing in potential new residents, visitors and businesses. So that's it from me for now. And as a reminder, you can find out more about the current situation at each of the theatres on this year's list on our website. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Davina to talk to you about our Resilient Theatres project.
Thank you. I'm Davina, I'm the project coordinator for Resilient Theatres, Resilient Communities, and I'm going to give you a quick overview of this project, which we're about 4 months into. It's an ambitious UK-wide programme with 3 major strands, and it's just over 3 years long. Its focus is to support communities which are operating a theatre building or considering taking one over. It builds on the success of a previous programme we ran, which supported 15 theatres with early stage work. Broadly, the project aims to engage a wider range of people with heritage, to develop skills and increase sector resilience. And through building sector resilience, we hope in the medium and long term to see things like groups feeling empowered to apply directly to funders or building relationships with new audiences and businesses. The funders of this project are the National Heritage Lottery Fund, the Pilgrim Trust and the Swire Charitable Trust. And here are the 3 strands. We have a grants programme, an advisor skills bank, which we're currently building, and a training and knowledge sharing programme. All 3 strands will run through the duration of the project. The grants programme is to support strategic and organisational development. So they're not for capital projects, but they are for things like commissioning viability studies or structural reports, business plans, fundraising strategies, and so on. The deadline for this year is coming up. It's this week on Friday, so there's still time to apply if anyone wishes to. And we'll be prioritising applications based on certain criteria, like whether the theatre is at risk or has heritage value. We'll award grants in April, and the project would need to be finalised by the end of the year. It's just worth noting we'll be following a very similar timeline and process next year and the year after as well. Secondly is the Advisor Skills Bank, which is a pool of specialist consultants. And we're really excited about piloting this new way of working because it's a chance for us to expand our current advice giving service, but also hopefully an opportunity to work with new people who we haven't worked with before. Applications for this are now closed, and we're hoping to appoint around 20 to 30 advisors from a range of specialist areas like change management, capital works, property law, charity law, and many others, and start contracting them from April. And finally, the training and knowledge sharing programme. This has 3 distinct areas. The first is cohort training, and for this we'll bring together 6 to 8 theatre groups each year from our Theatres at Risk register and offer them somewhat bespoke training. The training will focus on a new theme each year, and this year's is governance. I'm pleased to say that we've got the cohort confirmed for this year. We've got 8 groups signed up, and they're all in very different situations. So some are at a very early stage in their journey. Others already own their own theatre building, and others have a board of trustees but need support to expand and diversify their skills. And at the end of each year, we'll share learning from this area with the wider sector. The final 2 areas are webinars and advice notes, and these very much go hand in hand. So each year we'll deliver 3 webinars, and these will be available open to the whole sector. And they'll be on various topics like fundraising, finance, audience development, and many others. After each one, we'll produce related materials and advice notes and upload them to our website for everyone to be able to access. We're hoping to host the first webinar in April or early May, so please check our website from next month for further details about this. Thank you, and we're now going to start the first of our 2 panel sessions, so I'm going to hand you back to Janina, the Theatres at Risk Advisor and Programme Manager.
Thanks, Janina. I'm just checking that we've got our panelists pinned. So welcome to this, our first panel discussion, which is all about exploring funding opportunities and recent government initiatives that have benefited some of our theatres at risk. Since 2019, over 9.9 billion has been allocated across the UK to a number of initiatives under the Levelling Up agenda, including Levelling Up Fund, Towns Fund, Future High Streets Fund, Shared Prosperity and Community Ownership Fund. We've seen a number of theatres apply for and secure funding from these schemes. And in this panel session, we're going to explore how some of our theatres at risk have been able to make use of these funds. And we'll talk about the importance of collaborative working, particularly with theatre and campaign groups working with their local councils to access some of this funding. I'm really pleased to be joined by 4 panel speakers connected to 3 of our theatres at risk. We've got Bruce Knight, the Arts and Heritage Activity Coordinator at Spilsby Session House, and Lydia Rusling, the Assistant Director for Economic Growth at East Lindsey District Council, who'll be talking about Spilsby Theatre. Then we've got Sophie Gibson, the Director of Burnley Empire Trust, talking about the Burnley Empire. And finally, Scott Cardwell, the Assistant Director for Economy and Development at City of Doncaster Council, who'll be talking to us about the Grand Theatre in Doncaster. So I'm going to start off by introducing Bruce Knight and Lydia Rusling. I'm just checking that they've been spotlit. And they're here to talk about Spilsby Sessions House. So this Grade 2 listed theatre has been on our at-risk register since 2015 as a result of the deteriorating condition of the building. It's recently been awarded £3 million of an £8 million levelling up investment to East Lindsey District Council. So if I can start by coming over to you, Bruce. Firstly, congratulations on the levelling up bid. But before we talk about that, can you start off by telling us a little bit more about the history of Spilsby, the building, and how it's been used over the years and why it's important?
Thank you. Yeah, Spilsby Sessions House was originally built in 1827 as a prison and courthouse. The prison was knocked down in the 1860s, and the site that remains today eventually became a courthouse and the local police station. And it didn't become a theatre until 1984. It was transformed by a local entrepreneur, and since then has been run by a charity, and then recently taken over by the Spilsby Sessions House charity. And the condition of the building, well, it started to severely deteriorate in 2015, ingress of water, dry rot, roof trusses collapsing, and yeah, it's on its very last legs, shall we say.
And Bruce, you've been involved with Spilsby Sessions House since 2015. Can you tell us a bit about the journey that you've been on since then? Because it's quite a journey, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, so in 2015, we literally began with a small few community group. We formed a CIC to get the project going. So we began literally by putting on we made one room usable in the building, put on a theatre production, raised about £1,000 and got going from there. And then began to recruit more board members, get more people involved. Started to apply for funds to undertake viability studies, structural surveys, all of the initial work that needed to be done. And we were successful in applications to National Lottery Heritage Fund, to the Architectural Heritage Fund, and of course the Theatres Trust. And the funding, there were two phases of that. There was a viability study and at the time a phasing study, and economic development work as well, economic studies as well. And it was through that work that we reached a point where we were starting to comprehend the enormity of the task ahead in fundraising for a theatre of this nature in the location where it is.
And is there anything you can kind of say about acquiring the ownership of the building that might be useful?
Yeah, so that was a very long-winded process. So it was owned by a charity that had run it. They'd never had any local authority support. Mainly, they'd never pursued it, I should say. And so there was a desire to take over the building. The charity was quite willing to do that. But we did take quite a long-winded process for the current charity to take on the ownership. It was bought for £1 in the end, because of its condition. And so, yeah, we've had quite a journey just sorting out all of that paperwork.
So just kind of moving on a little bit to kind of talk about your relationship with the council. I think it's fair to say that community and theatre groups can sometimes struggle to build relationships with their local councils. Can you talk a bit about what you did to engage with the council? And have you got any advice to groups to give as well? Yeah,
well, obviously we've got a broken building, and my background's in outdoor arts. So we made a lot of noise, drew a lot of attention to ourselves so that we couldn't be ignored to start with. So we worked with some local artists, local producers, put in some small arts council project grants, and started to do outdoor events. We put on a whole Spilsby Light Night, which really did attract a lot of audience and a lot of attention to the project. And then we began to start having conversations with the council. There was no at that point, there was no cultural strategy for East Lindsey. So we tried to campaign a little bit and advocate for that. And we started to find that the district councils were very much interested in pursuing that. There was a significant moment when the East Lindsey District Council initiated their Vital and Viable Market Towns programme, which is all about placemaking. It coincided shortly after the Theatres Trust's conference on placemaking, which was very handy. And so we were able to start to speak a common language. We have had to learn how to speak local authority, along with how to speak fluent heritage as well. And so it was the beginning of really communicating and seeing what could be done and identifying what the broader issues were, how we started to realize how we could align what we wanted to achieve as an arts organization with what the aims and strategies were with the district council. And so the dialogue began, but it took a little while to get that going, but we're definitely there now.
And we're going to hear a bit from Lydia in a moment about the details of the levelling up bid. But can you just talk a bit about your involvement in preparing that bid, and also what support you received from the council to do that?
Yeah, so the point that there were two level ups. There was the first application was to round one, which wasn't successful. The situation we were in was we'd managed to get the project to a point where it was looked at as a phased project. And so there was a significant amount of work to be done just to put it back into one shape again. So from speaking with the council, we were able to commission further business consultancy and architectural study work and cover some of our own time as well, because up to this point, it'd been fully a voluntary mission, which was quite exhausting. Luckily, I work freelance and I could put a lot of time into it, but it was becoming a struggle. So we were able to get a bit of support for our organisation as well, cover some of our time, cover the time that was needed to put that bid together. We obviously the district council speak fluent central government, so they were able to translate all of the work that we'd done into what was needed for the levelling up bid. But it was a considerable amount of work, and it had to be done at a really short notice in a really short space of time. So that local authority support was absolutely crucial in making that happen.
And so just very quickly, kind of looking to the future now, can you just tell us a bit? Obviously, you've bought the building, you've got this the £3 million hopefully to do lots of kind of works to the building. What's next?
What's next is we have to go through planning and then start to get work happening on site. We're now focused. I'm particularly focused on revenue, because the Levelling Up Fund is obviously just for capital works. We've established, there's another project that we've done with the district council, which was a Festive Fabuloso project. And we created an outdoor arts product that we're able to sell, and helps us generate some income. Because one of the big challenges is how to keep going whilst all that construction work, or there's another at least 2 years of work ahead of us. So part of it is integrating the outdoor arts program into the future of the building, in becoming a producing house in that sense, as well as a functioning community venue and theatre and heritage site once it opens. So all of the work that has to be done now is all about how that venue is going to run and operate. There's all the forward planning that's needed there. So there's a lot of that work is what we're beginning to do. So we're looking at the Shared Prosperity Fund. Literally just in the last few days, we've been putting together an arts development plan, so that will inform an initial expression of interest to that fund. We're also looking to match that with Arts Council funding. One of the key things about the area we're in is that it only has 2 NPOs in the whole of the area, which is the same size, bigger than London, and so it's looking at how we can start to engage more with the Arts Council and bring them in and get their involvement more in East Lindsey.
Well, thanks very much, Bruce. I'm now going to move over to introduce Lydia Rusling, who's the Assistant Director Economic Growth at East Lindsey District Council, to get her to talk a little bit about the council's work on pulling together the successful Levelling Up bid. So just checking, Lydia's been spotlit, if we can see her. Lydia, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Brilliant. So firstly, again, congratulations to you two on the Levelling Up bid. That's fantastic news. As you know, there's often a huge amount of work in preparing for bids like these. Could you talk to us a bit about the council's work in the lead up to the bid?
Yes, of course, and thank you. Bruce already gave us a really good introduction. Back in 2019, we established a programme called Vital and Viable, and we did that in partnership with the Institute of Place Management, and that really led to us getting a much greater connection with our local communities. My role covers East Lindsey, Boston and South Holland, so a selection of market towns across quite a big geography. And that engagement with our local communities, our local residents and local businesses was absolutely critical to looking at how we developed action plans. And I've heard today about the role of kind of culture and heritage in placemaking, and that Vital and Viable programme really laid a good foundation for us and got us introduced really to people like Bruce, and to understand what the potential benefits were of working with in collaboration with community groups. As Bruce said, we did apply for Levelling Up in round 1. I think we probably tried to spread the funding ask too thinly. And we really listened and took on board the feedback, which was really constructive following round one. And we focused much more on our cultural and heritage assets for round two. So the bid was a package bid focused not just on Spilsby, but also our market town of Alford as two key gateways between the area of outstanding natural beauty, which is the Lincolnshire Wolds, and our Lincolnshire coast. Really to drive footfall and to increase our visitor economy. But I think one of your speakers earlier said it wasn't just about economic growth and visitors, it was about how we make our areas more attractive for people to live and to work in as well. So that kind of journey really that we went on, right from the community engagement in Vital and Viable, learning kind of the feedback from levelling up round one, and then developing our levelling up round two, very much a collaborative process.
And so in terms of the round two bid itself, can you talk us a bit about how you actually put that bid together? What other areas it covers, but how Spilsby was sort of integrated into that plan? Yes,
of course. And I think the experience that we have gained through having two town deals in East Lindsey as well was absolutely valuable to this process. So we have two town deals, one in Skegness and one in Mablethorpe, and we worked very much collaboratively on those town deals, developing the business cases in collaboration with the project lead. Some of them are local authority led, but others are done in partnership. So based on the development of the town deals, we then brought on board, I think, a set of experts. So really, the preparatory work that Bruce had done at Spilsby was really fundamental in us having a head start, so to speak, in the levelling up proposal. The connection with other funding was really important, and Bruce mentioned the development of our cultural strategy, which ran alongside the process for levelling up. So we were able to secure some Arts Council funding to develop a cultural strategy during 2021. And that really laid a good foundation for us, building on that approach to cultural-led regeneration, and then bringing on board expertise in heritage. So that combination really of heritage professionals, that community engagement, the preparatory work that Bruce had invested in, but also looking at the future sustainability of our places. So we looked at Spilsby and Alford, not just as individual market towns, but how they connected to the wider place, to Lincolnshire, but also to the Midlands as a whole. You know, our coastline attracts the most amount of visitors from the Midlands. So how were we utilising that asset to drive footfall into Spilsby and to Alford as kind of key gateways to the coast, and connecting it through to our kind of cultural ecosystem, really. And we wouldn't have been able to do that without that cultural strategy and that help from Arts Council. And that has then subsequently led on to us becoming a national portfolio organisation, which starts in April 2023. And just touching on what Bruce said, we've tried to look at lots of different sources of funding. So not just thinking of just levelling up. So utilising funding from Arts Council, as we've mentioned, supporting applications for funding from Heritage, and also using the government's UK Shared Prosperity funding as well to support that approach.
That's brilliant. I think one of the things Bruce touched on just a moment ago was about, obviously, the amount of work it can be for community groups, often, doing this kind of work voluntarily. And I understand the council provided some support to Bruce and the team around that. Could you just talk a little bit about what that was?
Yeah, so as part of the levelling up initiative, we received capacity funding from government, and we utilised some of that capacity funding to support Bruce, but also the projects in Alford. I think that's really critical because we wanted to value their input. It wasn't just about taking and supporting a bid, it was also looking at how we worked collaboratively in partnership and also not just about the building, about how our bid supported that long-term sustainability of Bruce's community interest company as well. So as Bruce mentioned, it wasn't just focused on levelling up, it was actually how were we going to work collaboratively to support Festive Fabuloso, for example, and that project alone has emanated through our market towns, and we've been able to demonstrate the benefit not just for Spilsby but throughout our market towns in East Lindsey, and we're actually working with Bruce now and seeing how we can extend that across the South and East Lincolnshire Council's partnership area, which I work across.
Brilliant. And Lydia, just as a final question, I think it's fair to say bringing together a partnership of local stakeholders and partners is really important for any projects like this one. Have you got any advice for theatre or community groups about how they might work to build relationships with councils?
Just listen to Bruce from that. I think looking at the local authorities as not just a funding source, but looking at how you work with them to support research in the area, understand your area better, get that community and business engagement, but also kind of pitching into the council to demonstrate the benefits of working with a local theatre, and it not just being economic. And I know that's really important. I'm an assistant director for economic growth, and I really see the benefit of using the theatre as a catalyst to drive footfall, to bring visitors to the area, but looking more widely about how those organisations can support you with social and community benefits as well. And I think something that we've really learnt through this process is, you know, being creative in how you work with these organisations to engage young people, for example. So being broad in your approach, not just focused on funding, but looking at how you can support some of the wider objectives of the council, and it being a true partnership with equal respect, I think, on both sides has been really helpful for us.
Well, thank you so much to Bruce and Lydia. I think, for sharing your experiences. We can certainly see that the Spilsby Sessions House has made really great progress towards achieving its ambitions, and certainly the £3 million from levelling up funding is going to go a huge way towards saving this important local theatre. But we do recognise there's still loads more work to do, ensuring the building is stable and secure, and that its future operations are sustainable. So thank you both very, very much. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time towards the end if there's any more questions, but I'm going to move on now to our next panel speaker and introduce Sophie Gibson, who's the director of the Burnley Empire Trust. So just as a bit of background, the Grade 2 Burnley Empire has been on Theatres at Risk Register since 2006, when we started the list, and it's been empty since 1995 when Bingo moved out. And Burnley Empire Trust has fundraised tirelessly to raise awareness and fundraise for the building, having secured a number of different funding pots, including the National Lottery Heritage Fund Resilient funding, High Street Heritage Action Zone funding, and grants from the Architectural Heritage Fund, the Theatres Trust, and it's also awaiting a decision on Burnley Council's Shared Prosperity Fund. So Sophie, hopefully you're there. Could you start off by telling us a little bit more about the history of the Burnley Empire and the building, and how it's been used over the years and why it's so important?
Hiya, thanks very much for having us today. So the Burnley Empire, that was built in 1894 and by local architects GB Rawcliffe, and it was the commission came from a local person that ran the Victoria Opera House in Burnley, and he was, you know, at the time there was many other different venues, but he said that there isn't anywhere big enough for a large variety of entertainment to stop off in Burnley. So from that, the commission came to build the Burnley Empire on the land of a disused factory, sort of an eyesore at the time. So in 1894, the commission went ahead, the Burnley Empire Music Hall of Varieties was built, and then later down the line in 1911, it was redesigned by Bertie Crew. And over the years, many years of its existence, it's had a variety of use. So from being variety theatre, the first venue in Burnley to show moving pictures, as well as proper cinema and like Amdram sort of performers, as well as going on to being the bingo hall, which probably saved it. But then, of course, it closed in 1995.
And Sophie, like Bruce, you've really been on a journey with your theatre. Can you talk to us a little bit about your involvement with the building?
Yeah, so I think people first started to get together, it was late 2015. And it was a case of this building existed, everyone knew what it was quite intriguing, yet so big you could miss it at the same time. Pretty much in the centre, Burnley town centre, and it had just been abandoned, and I was always curious about the building. And people started to get together and chat about it. Someone should do something, that kind of thing. So that's where I got involved. And there was quite a few people there, a good variety, a good mix of people from the community. And then over time, it sort of got a little bit more serious of someone should do something, and starting to raise awareness of the building, because as much as it existed there physically, it was a bit of an unknown of what was actually inside. So we started in 2015, did all the things that we thought we should do, like reach out to Theatres Trust and the local authority to get the conversations going. And then it came to 2016 where we managed to commission a viability study to see if it actually was viable to do something. So we sort of went by the name of Burnley Empire Theatre Trust, and there was a few of us at the time from, you know, a variety of backgrounds, that not necessarily anything like this, I suppose. So it's been a massive learning curve along the way. And then we got into good conversations with the council, created a stakeholders group that included Burnley Civic Trust, Burnley College, as well as UCLan, Theatres Trust, as well as Burnley Council. So we did that in 2 phases, and the idea was if it is viable, then we can continue. So we had to, it felt like earning our stripes, I suppose, in the early days. So we had to fundraise towards that viability study as well. So we were lucky to get the cost of that covered by the council. Theatres Trust had a grant at the time, as well as we raised some funds through fundraisers, sort of magic nights, music nights, and also managed to secure a grant from Architectural Heritage Fund as well. So it was successful, the 2016 report, and then it went on to do the second phase of that in 2017. But at that point, during that time, the building came up to auction, as it was owned by the Duchy of Lancaster's estate. So it was only known as a bingo hall. They were not currently aware at the time of the historic value or the group trying to do anything about it, the viability study. So as soon as they did, they sort of pulled it from the auction and gave us time to continue the work that we were doing. And then, of course, it was all viable, and we continued to sort of move forward and try and save the building in the best way that we could. And all at that point we'd not been inside the building either. But of course, it was this incredible thing that needed to be saved.
And you actually have bought the building, haven't you? It'd be good to just hear a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, you know, we went from someone should do something about this to actually we had to make a really quick decision about us being the ones to sort of lead it on a little bit more. So the building came up for auction in 2018. So as a result of that original viability study, we sort of tried to have the conversations to build a building preservation trust to take it forward. But unfortunately, there just wasn't enough confidence to sort of join forces and take that forward. And so the solicitors representing the estate advised us that it was going up for sale, and that was it. But, you know, also at this point, we had been offered it, but as a group of people, we didn't really feel that we could take on the building. But as time had gone by, and there was, you know, so much love from the community and support as well, we got to the point where there was about 2 weeks left of the auction date, and sort of decided in one of our meetings that actually maybe we should do it, maybe we have to buy it to sort of save it for the sake of its future legacy. And all of that historical value and its place in the community. So we did, and 3 of us created a company. So we created Burnley Empire Limited to take ownership of the building. And it was all kind of like behind closed doors to try and sort of get this done really quickly to make sure that it happened so we could secure the building, because otherwise people were off to auction, and you know, we had the fears that it might get turned into something else that wouldn't be as valuable to the community. So we managed to do it, and we managed that with the support of Theatres Trust, and as well as at the time National Trust were involved and sort of there as a supportive sort of partner in one way to sort of help advise, but really from a group of people that hadn't known each other previously to take it on. You know, it was also really helpful that there was an anonymous supporter that donated us some money to help us take ownership, because of course when you take ownership of something like this, insurances, that's really important. So thankfully we had all of that advice. We had the help from a solicitor to sort of sign for it as well, and we managed to do it. So we took ownership of it, and then I think that's one of the best steps that we've done really, and we're so lucky compared to other groups as well, that we managed to secure the building and then continue to work with National Trust as well with a partnership agreement. And so in 2019 we managed to secure together a grant from National Lottery Heritage Fund for a resilience grant, because we'd never been inside this building, we'd not stepped inside it. I was too young to actually go to it when it was open. So we'd bought this building, not having not been inside before, but just knowing it was the right thing to do. And then it was just onwards and upwards and a bit up and down in between as well.
And Sophie, I'm just going to just to quickly sort of summarise, because I know you've had a huge amount of experience of support of securing a number of kind of smaller pots of funding. I mean, you've mentioned a few of those now, but you know, you've had the support of private donors, you've had Architectural Heritage Fund support, you've done your own kind of crowdfunding and fundraising nights. You've also got funding through sort of Heritage Action Zone, and then so you've got now, you're awaiting decision on your shared prosperity application. You haven't heard anything yet, have you? Just checking. Still not yet. But just in terms of the future, I just wanted to know kind of can you talk a bit about what's next on the horizon for the trust and for your work?
Yeah, so we've just received the results from a viability study exploring the use of the stage house, because similar to Bruce, I suppose, like with the levelling up, looking at it through a phased approach, which, you know, we'd gone for the levelling up fund as well, and unfortunately we weren't successful. So we really are looking at that phased approach. And next for us, so we've had the positive results from the viability study, which was funded through Architectural Heritage Fund. And, you know, we want to pursue the idea of now focusing on that stage house, because it's got presence, it shows that it's happening. We're not just talking about this project, and that it's got support. But by doing that recent piece of work, we actually realised how far that we've come. So I talked about the last results of the study, and there was no one sort of really willing to get on board and take it forward, whereas now it's been such a change in attitudes and support, rather, that, you know, this potential to build up partnerships with the local education and college, as well as, you know, Burnley Leisure, which is a charity from Burnley Council to run their leisure offer in the town as well. So we're looking at pursuing partnerships to take that forward, but also as a route forward to focus, you know, whilst we continue to stabilise the building, but also get that working as a working venue in itself with its own entity, as sort of like a found space that's an alternative subculture, something, because Burnley has a really sort of rich history of music, as well as all the different arts and performance aspects, but there really is a need to sort of help grassroots performers and, you know, to sort of use that space and utilise it as we go through a phased approach of the whole restoration.
So Sophie, I think that's unfortunately that's all we've got time for to talk to you about about Burnley Empire. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences. Despite all of these kind of really great advances that you've made, we know there's still quite a long way to go to getting the building fully restored and reopened. And we will, at Theatres Trust, we will continue to work with you and support the Trust in its ongoing work. But thanks very much. Lastly, I'm going to move on quickly now to our last panel member. And I'd like to introduce Scott Cardwell, the Assistant Director for Economy and Development at the City of Doncaster Council. Just by way of introduction, the Grade 2 listed Grand Theatre in Doncaster has been on our register since 2006, when we started the list. The Grand was threatened with demolition until a local campaign led to the building being listed in 1994. Today, the theatre is owned by the company that runs the neighbouring Frenchgate shopping centre, and the building remains empty and in a poor state of repair. And as part of the Doncaster Town's Deal Fund, about £75,000 was earmarked to support the Grand. So Scott, firstly, can you just start off by telling us a little bit more about the history of the building and why it's so important?
Thanks, Janina. Yeah, the theatre's in a really prominent location. So if anyone comes out of Doncaster Station, it's one of the first buildings that you do actually see. It's a Victorian theatre. It was built in 1889. It enjoyed many years as a very popular theatre for the as was town then. But unfortunately, it closed in 1961. The theatre use closed, and then it was converted to a bingo, a hall where it carried on for another 35 years, and indeed the building was closed, and it's not been open since 1995. It is a Grade 2 listed building, and as I say, it is in a really prominent part of the city, which is why we are very keen on trying to do anything we can to bring it forward.
And I think in terms of the background, it's been a real struggle sort of since 1995 to kind of progress any plans of the building. But I think it's fair to say there's been a bit more sort of development over the last couple of years, particularly sort of since it feels like momentum's kind of building, and there's a new consortium that's been recently established. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think the key word there is momentum. I think in the past, there's not been kind of funding available to try and coalesce and bring a group together to work collaboratively to think of ideas. So I think, you know, the recent rounds of things like Town Deal or levelling up funding that local authorities have been able to secure for the towns and city centres are really important to try and utilise some of that funding to bring forward buildings like this. So we've given a portion of our Town Deal money towards heritage, and we're obviously very keen on trying to support building some momentum about the future of that theatre. And so we, off the back of that, we've established a working group which covers a very broad partnership of people. So the council are represented on there. We've also got some politicians, so the portfolio holder for businesses on there. We've got the Chamber of Commerce are represented there. We've got the Friends of Grand Theatre. Obviously the Theatres Trust as well are on the group, as well as the local Leisure Trust, who do look after other theatres in Doncaster as well. And to be honest, there's a really strong collaborative, energised partnership around this now, which is really great to see. And it does feel like we are starting to make some headway around future plans. I think there's always going to be challenges around tying down large sums of capital. You know, you're probably talking upwards of 20 million if we were going to renovate the building. So the focus from the group has been trying to look at meantime uses, because, you know, it's very important to get people, you know, there's a lot of people locally through surveys who have said they're very passionate about the building, they would like to see it come forward. And what we're trying to do as a group is open that up a little bit and have some kind of meantime use there that will get people actually interacting with the building again, and then start to build on that. And I do think these kind of feasibility studies and pots like that are really important to try and act as, and not only magnetise the people working around it to feel like they've got some momentum, but also then start to draw in plans where you can pull in other capital things. And it's you know, the Town Deal has really started to put the theatre back on the map the the council's view about what they're going to do with the building. And also importantly, we don't own it, as Janina says. It's owned by a local shopping centre which absolutely wraps around the building, but it has energised them as well around the art of the possible with the building.
And just sort of very quickly, in terms of the Town Steel Fund, what can you just talk a little bit about how that is going to specifically, what that's going to do to kind of benefit the building, or how that money can be spent?
Yeah, so there's a 500k pot out of a total 25 million Town Deal Fund, where we are transforming the I suppose the gateway to the city. So it's the area around the rail station with some new public realm, a new kind of office development there as well. And obviously we wanted to use that money towards enhancing the Grand Theatre because of its prominent position right in that kind of city gateway area. So some of the money is also being used for some local churches as well around feasibilities and our archive services. But we are wanting to really do as much commitment as we can through this fund towards, if you like, creating a route map of how we can bring the theatre back into use. That's then other funding streams that may well come along from government can piggyback off of. I've been kind of in this role a long time, and usually jobs, it's all about jobs and GVA funding, and we are starting to see now reference to culture and heritage coming in funding streams, and we're hoping that is going to continue, not only through central government, but also through some of our mayoral combined authorities or city regions, and really start to influence people to think differently about what cities needs in terms of injecting vibrancy in there, and that's why we are so supportive of this.
And just very quickly, Scott, just wondered if you got any advice for how theatre or kind of community groups can work with their local councils to kind of access funds. How can they make sure that they remain on the agenda?
I think just engaging in a positive way, because all too easy you kind of let's say more fractious relationships, which is not good for keeping up momentum. So I think it's genuinely is if you've got a building that is truly part of the place, and theatres are, a lot of people got fond memories around that historically as well. You've got a case there to kind of build up and influence the local politicians about doing the right thing for the place around the building, whether it be listed or not. And I think that's the place to start, is kind of capture the hearts and minds around it. And I think the economic side of things will come as we see assets like this become more integral to city centre life, because obviously retail is on the decline. And the old kind of arts and culture side of things in cities is on the ascendance. And so, what better time frame to be trying to work with these existing buildings to bring them back into use?
And Scott, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I'm just keeping a look on time, and we're going to have to move on. But I just wanted to say thank you so much. It's been really interesting in hearing about how the council can play a supportive role in theatre projects, even when it doesn't own the building. Looking at the time, we don't have time right now to go to any questions for the panel, but I will, if people still want to put some questions in the chat function, we'll make sure that those questions come, are sent to our panel speakers. So if I can just say thank you once again to all of our panel speakers. Thanks very much for your time. And I'm going to pass us over now to my colleague Claire.
Thank you, Janina. Let me just share my screen. Brilliant, and hopefully everybody can see that. First of all, just to check, can I start by asking all panelists if they can turn on their videos so that we can spotlight them for the audience? Thank you. Great. Thank you, lovely to see you. So welcome to this, our second panel session, which is all about celebrating success. And in particular, the success of those 3 theatres being removed from the Theatres at Risk register this year. You've already heard them mentioned. They are, of course, the Century Theatre in Cardwell, Leicestershire, Swansea Palace Theatre, and the Walthamstow Granada, or Soho Theatre Walthamstow, as it is to be known. All 3 are remarkable but very different types of theatres, ranging from a Victorian music hall to a spectacular cine variety from the 1930s and through to a post-war travelling theatre. All are united by their cultural past, the support of their communities, and vitally important, the support of their local authorities, and all have bright new theatres ahead. I am delighted to be joined by representatives from all of the theatres today. So to introduce them, we have Alessandra Babalola, co-chair and artist-in-resident at Soho Theatre Walthamstow, Michael Rush, the project director at Waltham Forest Council, Ashley Davis from GWP Architecture, who's the lead architect on the Swansea Palace restoration project, Councillor Robert Francis Davis, the Cabinet Member for Investment, Regeneration and Tourism at Swansea Council, and Sam Gurdon, the Artistic Director at Century Theatre. Welcome to all of the panellists. Now, before I start the discussion, as with the previous session, we hope there'll be an opportunity to ask questions at the end. So please do drop your questions in the chat function. If we run out of time, then we will, of course, pick them up later on and email everybody with answers. I'm going to start our session by talking about the Century Theatre and to give our audience a very brief background about this theatre. The Century was constructed as a mobile theatre, was built after the Second World War and travelled the country for 23 years, taking theatre and productions to towns that had lost their venues during the war. Eventually, changes in highways regulations meant that the theatre was no longer able to tour, and in 1996, it finally came to rest as a permanent performance space and museum exhibit at Snibston Discovery Museum in Cardwell, the town where the idea of the Century Theatre was first conceived. But in 2014, plans were announced to close the Discovery Museum, leaving the theatre isolated and under threat, and at which point we added it to our Theatres at Risk register. The museum was demolished in 2015. However, fast forward to the present day, and the museum site and adjacent parkland have undergone considerable investment by the council, reopening as Snibston Colliery Park. The master plan proposals for the park have better integrated the Century with its surroundings, provided new facilities and made it more visible and accessible, all helping to secure the future of this remarkable theatre. I'm going to turn to Sam now. And sorry, just before I do, Councillor Francis Davis, I wonder if I could ask you to put your mute yourself at the moment. We're getting a little bit of feedback from your microphone. Thank you. Perfect. Sam, I've touched briefly on the history of the Century, but to those visiting the theatre for the first time, there's little about the exterior of the building to indicate it was a travelling theatre, and we've got the image on screen there. Can you tell us a little bit more about its past, about the construction of it, about its history, and what you've been doing to capture these stories and tell them to a new audience? And I've got some images on screen now.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Claire. The Century Theatre is indeed extraordinary. I would say an extraordinary building, but it's an extraordinary structure, which you can't really see from the newly built exterior. And it's actually originally was composed of 4 huge trucks that travelled very slowly from place to place and popped up as a fully working theatre, like just mind-blowing. And I love to see people's faces when you explain to them about how the actual theatre worked and ran, because everybody's like, really? How is that even possible? And it was thanks to, you know, John Ridley and the designing the engineers that made this structure possible. And we still have the theatre in its original condition. So the 4 trucks are permanently together now. They are on stilts, so you can come around the back of the theatre. Don't look at the modern frontage. You come around the back and you'll see we still have the wheels in situ. You can look underneath the theatre and see how the axles worked, and it all went up and down. But the challenge is getting people to really understand how the theatre worked. Sadly, it no longer travels, as you say, the highways, the new Highways Act meant it was too big and too slow at 10 miles an hour, with these huge trucks traveling around the theatre for it to continue to be viable on the road. But it is absolutely fabulous, and the seats fit together. The team used to show up at a field in a location where the theatre had probably been destroyed during the Second World War, and offered live performance to towns that were in desperate need, possibly of some entertainment, some light entertainment. And this year, actually, well, this season, 2022-23 season, is the 70th anniversary of the theatre, which opened here in 1948. And you can see some very politically dubious photographs of the original Othello there. But we did start our autumn-winter season with a brand new telling of Othello, just to try and bring the theatre into the 21st century.
Brilliant. And if I move on to the next slide now, we can actually see the theatre, and on that top row there for the audience, this is the theatre actually arriving at Snibston Discovery Park back in 1996, and the images on the kind of row below are from around about 2015, just about the time of the museum closure. And of course, the theatre remained operational even after the museum's closure, and it kind of had to deal with that fallout of becoming isolated, a lack of visibility, of making it difficult access. How tricky was it for you programming and operating the theatre at that stage?
It was challenging. A lot of people thought the theatre closed, you know, at the same time as the museum closed, but we were still here plugging away. And people were still coming, you know, people were still showing up and coming to see events. And it was just about making sure people knew that we were still here, tailoring some of the programming to our regulars, whilst at the same time trying to bring in new and diverse work, which is my background, to the area. And Colville is an ex-mining town. The theatre actually, I don't know if you can see from these photos, but the theatre actually sits on a heritage site of the Snibston Colliery mine, which closed in the 80s. So it's very unique, and bringing people back, you know, politically was a bit of a struggle, but we got there, and with the help of Theatres Trust, we soldiered on through. You know, started to pick up, and then COVID came, and then, you know, it's been an interesting sort of roller coaster. I've been here 5 years now, and just when you think, you know, things are going, something else comes along. And to be honest, the theatre, when it's known as the Blue Box more affectionately. So if you've not heard of the Century Theatre and you're in the industry, you probably have heard of the Blue Box. But its tagline was a crisis on wheels. And it kind of feels like sometimes that's still true, but it's so brilliant to be on this side of the panel now, saying how that, you know, the future's looking really bright for us.
Brilliant. And I'm going to move on to the next slide, which can show people that bright future, hopefully. So, so this is the new Colliery Park that's opened, and of course the theatre's so much better integrated into it. You know, the theatre is owned and operated through the council, and that council support must have been key, particularly in working through this master plan. And you've also touched on the support of the community. Can you tell us a little bit more about how having that supportive council and the supportive community has been important for you?
I mean, absolutely vital. The county, Leicestershire County Council, who own and operate the theatre, and who I'm an officer of, have really seen the value of not only the wider site, but keeping the theatre going. And that is just so important when your council is behind you. Well, I mean, you know, we are the council, essentially. And the Century Theatre is the only performing arts venue in the County Council portfolio. So they were really, really keen to keep the Century Theatre going, and being part of the wider master plan, which was a £3 million development from the Leicestershire County Council to make the Snibston Colliery Park a destination for people. So not only is the theatre still going, but we've got a brand new cafe, we've got a brand new studio theatre, playground and play area, mountain bike tracks, it's a huge development, and with the theatre at its heart, I mean, I daren't think what would happen if you know, we weren't part of this master plan, and I'm so pleased that we are, and communities have responded really, really well. It seems now, I mean, Colville is a growing area, there's lots of regeneration going on, lots of jobs coming to the area, so we've not only got our stalwart, our regular faces that come all the time, and we've got this brand new audience that are just seeing this space for the first time and really want to get involved and really want to show their support for all the wonderful things that we've got planned now.
That's brilliant. Sam, thank you so much for sharing that story about the sanctuary with us. I am going to try and show a quick video about the sanctuary now. So if you bear with me, I'm just hoping I've put the right settings on Zoom, but if not, we will resolve that.
Century Theatre, it's a really lovely little theatre.
The nature of it, the authenticity of it is so unique.
It's really nice to really feel the energy that the audience are giving off.
It's just got so much history and ambience. It's just amazing.
Palace Theatre. So this is a theatre that has been on our Theatres at Risk register since 2006. It's a Victorian music hall, distinctive externally by its triangular shape. It's a building with a vibrant past and varying uses and has inspired much love from its local community. The building closed as a nightclub in 2006 and came into private ownership. It then remained vacant and decaying and in a dangerous state of disrepair, both internally and externally, until bought by Swansea Council in 2020. While currently there is neither the demand nor viability to return the palace to theatre use, the council have been careful custodians of the building, sharing Theatres Trust and local appreciation of the venue, of its historic significance and importance to the city and to the local community. The council have been undertaking sensitive and sympathetic restoration works, which will see the palace brought into new use as offices with the potential for community and event use and even small-scale performance. It's a scheme that, should there be future demand, could even see the palace returned to use as a theatre. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Councillor Francis Davis and Ashley Davis to tell us a little more about the project. Councillor Francis Davis, first of all, turning to you, the council has recognised the importance of the palace to Swansea from the outset. Can you tell me a little more about the theatre's connection to its community and why this building is so important to the city?
Well, it's a theatre that goes back a very long time to 1883, and it's gone through many different changes, but it's always been close to the hearts of the people that live within the city centre. It's not far from our railway station, but it had moved away from the city centre core, and so therefore it was very difficult for the building to be sustainable for any business. And you know, it's been music hall, it's been musical theatre, it was a bioscope, some of the very first moving pictures. Maudie Edwards, who's the pictures up in front of you, was known for the very first words in Coronation Street, who was from nearby Neath. You see Sir Anthony Hopkins there, who actually played his first professional role at this theatre. So people want to see it restored, but it became an area where had become run down. There was a sex trade, there was drugs area. It was a lot of antisocial behaviour. But in the meantime, we were lucky to have a leader in Swansea, Councillor Rob Stewart, who has been successful in attracting lots of money to Swansea in the Swansea Bay City region bid of 1.2 billion. We've, at this moment in time, we've got over £2 billion worth of schemes going ahead. But we talked to the community and asked them what they wanted. And social media played a big part in saying how important this building was. Swansea was decimated during the Second World War. And what the Luftwaffe didn't knock down, everybody else's neglect, could have seen the demise of this building where the Luftwaffe failed. And so we decided that, that yes, let's listen to the community. Let's get this building restored. And at the moment, we've got 5 Grade 2 listed buildings in Swansea being restored. So it's something I feel very proud of, because there wasn't a lot of old Swansea remaining in the city centre. So you can see the Budlier was taken over, but we wanted to get it put right. And so using ERDF money, money working with Welsh Government on transforming towns, there's probably not one part of Swansea city centre at the moment that isn't being transformed with, we got a document out called Reshaping Swansea. We are working with Urban Splash on lots of sites in Swansea. And we thought that this was a building worth protecting, worth restoring, by getting a sustainable use of it. And Tramshed Tech will be going in there. There will be some small performance spaces, but mainly through tech industries, having first-class office. But we have restored it and keeping the integrity of the building so that it can be used. And if the demand is there from the public, then it can be going back as a theatre in its own right.
That's brilliant. And, looking at the images on the screen, these are taken from around about 2020, at the time that council were looking to purchase the building. And it breaks my heart to see a building in this state where you see such dilapidation. And, as a council, that's a major decision to take on such a challenge. How would you encourage other local authorities to take that really difficult decision, actually, to financially invest in historic buildings such as this?
Listen to their constituents and give people back what they demand. It's all well and good having bright, shiny office spaces, nice glass buildings, but this is our heritage. We owe it to future generations to keep what we got. And Swansea made its wealth on the Industrial Revolution. That's why Swansea is here. Music hall and the likes came out of that Industrial Revolution to entertain the people that was making the wealth of those people. Things have moved on, yes, but we can learn a lot from our heritage. Life expectancy, quality of life. And the quality of life, I think, is so important for people, People call Swansea the graveyard of ambition. No, that's not that people aren't ambitious. We say that when you come here, you don't want to move away. But we owe it to these buildings that, we have got to put them back in a good state. It's no good having a listed building unless you listen to that and act upon it. It's been very difficult with many years of austerity budgets. But it's, I think, getting our priorities right and working with good industries that can make this building sustainable for the future.
That's brilliant. And it's fantastic to hear all of the investment that the council are making across the heritage buildings in their area. So thank you for that. I'd like to now move on to Ashley, just to speak a little bit about GWP's involvement in this project and your approach to the project and the design, because it really is one of such a careful restoration.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. It's as with all projects obviously involving existing buildings, one of the first things you do is you start with this focus period of research and analysis. And as Councillor Francis Davis has started talking about, this building is rich with heritage. So one of the starting points was to find sources of historical accounts, sources of historical imagery that will give us an appreciation of what it really did look like in its heyday. Speaking with people about the building who knew it well. One gentleman I've been speaking to over the last couple of years worked in the technical department during the late 50s and the early 60s. Speaking with him was fantastic, and getting to know literally every nook and cranny of that building. So this involved writing a heritage assessment and formulating a statement of significance, whereby we picked up on what was most significant and maybe what had lesser significance, particularly in knowledge of the phased process that the building has gone through. And this then led to a series of drawings, which you can see on this page, a set of sort of drawings identifying, certainly from the building fabric's perspective, the heritage significance of each part of that fabric. And that would then start to determine our approach. You can move on to the next slide. Great. Right. But externally, our focus is very much into honest repair and reinstatement of the existing fabric. The reason why I use the term repair and reinstatement, we are repairing literally every part of this fabric honestly, correctly, using the right materials, using the right techniques. But what we're also looking to do is to reinstate those parts of the building that have been lost over time. So you can see on the left-hand image this fantastic slated conical roof that was taken off, we think around the 60s, could have been a decade earlier, and it's been lost. And that was a particularly strong, iconic view going up High Street. So we're rebuilding that. On the top right and sort of middle right images, you can see the same view of the entrances. So on the right, the sharp end of the building was the entrance to the lounge, and to the left was the entrance to the theatre. They had beautiful entrance canopies, so we're reinstating those. Bottom right, there was a sign, a big sort of timber palace sign that we're reinstating as well. Next slide, please. So internally, we're doing the same. So what we're looking to do again is repairing what we've got and reinstating what we think we've lost. So here we've got the proscenium marks, that actually that top left-hand image with the plaster work was taken 2020, I think, and by 2021, with holes in the roof, we lost that entire plaster work. So it was very fortunate that we took molds of it so that we can reinstate it. We are reinstating the cast iron balcony fronts, placing the top balcony front back to where it originally was, which was actually on the upper floor. We are reinstating the counterweight steels, the pulleys, the weights, and even the 1950s strand switch and dimmer board, which you can see on the bottom right image. So all of these are being back into play. And just move on to the next slide. So what we're doing, of course, is we're also intervening into the building. Now, we know that we had to incorporate some elements that weren't originally there. And what we're doing is we're inserting a number of floors, which you can see the floors in red. Principally, these are in the stage house. And the idea behind that is we want the auditorium to retain the form and the volume that it originally had. Now, these interventions are important to make it work as a building in the future, but actually they are essentially all reversible interventions. So as we say, part of the intention, the hope is that actually this building, if ever wanted, could revert back to a theatre. However, one thing I pick up on this section is you can see a person standing at the front of the stage, and you can see the stalls, and you can see the two tiers, and you can see all the seating there. The idea is this could still operate as a small scale community maybe based theatre. Performances can still be presented there, albeit obviously not with the full flight hour, but because we've set the floor back from the inside of the stage house, we can also drape scenery or backdrops behind that stage as well.
That's brilliant, Ashley. Thank you. I'm aware we're running very short of time here, so I'm going to move on to our next slide. which you can, everything you've described on the previous slide, it's all about allowing the original architecture of that building to shine through. You can still tell it was a theatre. How important do you think that has been to the local community? And also, I'm going to kind of wrap it in with another question, which I'll go on to the next slide as you speak, also to talk about the importance of having such a supportive client.
As you say, the character and the essence of the theatre are what we're looking to retain, and everyone is absolutely behind that, even acknowledging the fact that it won't actually operate principally as a theatre, but retaining that character and that essence and celebrating it. Ironically, it's actually not really been used as a theatre since the 60s, even though it has stage productions in those times. It's been a bingo hall in the 60s, a private club in the 70s and 80s, nightclub in the 90s and the noughties. And there was a fire in 1949, which actually took away a fair bit of the stage end. But what we've got is the proverbial onion. We have layers of every one of those periods. And what was great when they actually did the work to fit it out as a nightclub is they retained so much of that original fabric. So what we're doing is restoring the outside very much as it was in 1888 and turning the inside into this office in a theatre. So people will be sitting at their desks, people will be looking across the auditorium, people will be looking up, down to the stage, and vice versa. And whilst we're doing that, we're also, as I say, allowing the opportunity for small performances to occur and the likes as well. Now, you ask about the client engagement. One of the most amazing things we've had with Swansea Council as a client is when we first presented this, the idea was very much, as I say, to restore this as a theatre, but make it work as an office. And the client was responsive to this, which surprised me a little bit. It was amazing. When we discovered the proscenium march, when we discovered the counterweight system, the dimmer board, the iron Parkinson, the timber bench seating at the top, and said, we want to retain these, we want to integrate these into the venue. The client said, absolutely. Now, obviously, we have to be mindful that there is a budget, and the budget is relatively tight. But what we've been doing here is every single decision is based on what is valuable to the project. What is fantastic from the council's perspective is, in their view, saving the fabric, character, and the essence of the Palace Theatre is deemed to be valuable, is deemed to be of significant value, and is worth doing properly. And that's the encouragement they've given us throughout the project.
It's absolutely fantastic to hear such a kind of forward-thinking client. I'm going to do last kind of very few last words on Swansea Palace, passing back over to you, Councillor Francis Davis, and just kind of briefly in one sentence, could you sum up what the impact of reopening this building will mean for the local area?
I think it give back a lot of civic pride to the area. You know, like I was actually born 200 meters from this building. My grandmother lived 200 meters the opposite way from this building, and always brought up all my family in theatre, not this theatre, but theatre in Swansea. I see Swansea as a cultural city. You know, you look at the names that have come out of it, you know, and the area, you know, Anthony Hopkins, Richard Burton, Catherine Zeta-Jones, you know, today. So much of it, you know, we've been shortlisted twice as a UK city of culture. We don't need awards to know we're a cultural city and how important culture is to the city. So we will fight on whether we get the title or not. That's irrelevant. I think it's delivering is the important thing. So getting a city that reinvents itself, that moves forward with looking at the past, learning from the past, but it's like we got the oldest museum in Wales. It's no good having exhibits if you don't exhibit them and if you don't conserve them. You know, we got to look at conservation, the presentation of it, the entire thing. And it's our duty to future generations.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you, Councillor Francis Davis and Ashley, for that really inspiring talk. I wish you all success with your project, and I look forward to seeing it completed. Thank you. Now, I am just going to stop sharing my screen at the moment, so we try and fix the issues with the sound, and my colleague, hand over to my colleague to play the Walthamstow video. Just to Alexandra Babalola and Michael Rush, who are joining us from Soho Theatre, Walthamstow. And we are playing in the background a loop of some of our slides, which will show some of the imagery from the theatre. So first of all, I'm going to ask Michael, the council's been involved in the building for a really long time. Can you tell us more about why this is such an important building for Walthamstow, what the key drivers were behind the council's decision to acquire and invest in the theatre?
Thank you, Claire, and hope you can hear me. Yeah, the former Granada Cinema in Walthamstow, it's an absolutely iconic local landmark. And if you speak to any local resident in Walthamstow, they'll have a fantastic story to tell you of their history or their connection to the theatre, to the cinema. That strength of local feeling really surfaced in 2003 when the building was sold to an evangelical church, and that kick-started a 15-year campaign by Waltham Forest Cinema Trust and by Soho Theatre to save the cinema, which ultimately ended in success at a public planning inquiry in 2013, where it was accepted that the building did have a viable future as an entertainment venue. At that time, its private sector owners developed proposals for such an entertainment venue, whilst the building was partly used as premises for a pub and for bars. But those proposals never proved deliverable and led to the council, supported by Theatres Trust, to consider a regeneration approach to develop the building as a cultural venue. From about 2017, the Theatres Trust helped us realise how restoration could be achieved and the value that it could bring to the cultural landscape and local economy. They facilitated contact with similar projects and provided a grant that supported the early development of a partnership between the council and Soho Theatre to work out how we would practically deliver this. A restored Granada cinema is a great idea for Walthamstow as part of its wider regeneration plans, particularly in boosting the local nighttime economy. And those plans already include several recent mixed-use developments nearby. We've got a new cinema, we've got shops, restaurants and a hotel all alongside new housing developments that have been recently completed. And also more recently, the University of Portsmouth announced that it's going to locate a new campus in Walthamstow. And that brings an additional 5,000 young people to us. That increases our confidence that we'll attract those theatre audiences, and it brings more of that economic footfall to the area. So that vision for the restored venue is that it forms the centrepiece of a wider culturally led regeneration in the town centre, where the venue serves as the main hub of a cultural quarter, effectively. And it builds on the legacy from Waltham Forest being the first London Borough of Culture in 2019. Just in terms of key drivers, I think it's worth noting that the council did take a moment in the summer of 2021 during the pandemic to reconsider its commitment to invest and whether this was the right thing to be doing at this time, given all of the uncertainty. The decision to continue was confirmed principally because the economic benefits from the project are absolutely key to the council's post-COVID economic recovery plan. And that proved to be a good decision, because the economic assessment of the project's benefits has recently been updated, and those forecasts have increased from the business case, so that we're now forecasting something like 46 to 61 million pounds worth of growth to the local economy over the first 10 years of operation, 222 long-term jobs created, and an additional 17 million pounds worth of indirect benefits, such as an increase in land and property prices that the project brings. And we are already... So,
I was going to say, Michael, that's absolutely fantastic. I'm really sorry, but we're running very short of time, and I want to make sure that we can speak to Alessandra as well. And I'm just so impressed by the council's kind of investment in the building. And it's incredible to hear those new economic forecasts as well. But Alessandro, so we can get some time just speaking to you in Soho Theatre, just picking up on Michael's point about kind of the community support, or the groundswell of community support for this building. Why do you think it's had such an impact on the community, and what is it about the ambience and the memories of this building that are so important?
basically, there's no other building like the Granada in the borough. There's a sense of awe when you step inside. It has a real sort of aura about it. It's quite awe-inspiring. In its lifetime, it's had, as Michael pointed out, and also like the theatre that we previously looked at, it's had lots of different iterations. A cinema, it's been a music venue, a place to see panto, a Bollywood cinema, a bar, and all of these layers of history are contained within the space visibly. And naturally, are going to be preserved as part of the restoration of the building in order to keep that character that makes it so rich. It resonates with people from lots of different generations, from people that have had first dates at the cinema, to people that went to see gigs, like artists such as the Beatles that performed there in the 60s. And most recently, it was, somewhere to just go to socialize. But ultimately, the building and what it presents, entertainment, is so important to the community, as is evidenced by the decade-long grassroots campaign that was fought to save it. So, when you are dealing with something that is of such an incomparable nature to its community, naturally, the entire community bands behind it, because we have nothing, without that, we really have nothing that carries such impact for us. So it's very special to every single member of Waltham Forest.
Yeah, I can imagine, and also important for Soho Theatre. And continuing those links with the community are also going to be very important for you. Can you tell us a little bit about Soho Theatre's plans for their own community engagement?
Okay, well, as far as community engagement is concerned, the community of support, of course, means a lot to Soho Theatre. We wouldn't even be where we are today without that community support. But theatre also has to be viable. It needs to have a USP and a robust business model. So Soho Theatre Walthamstow will be a dedicated venue for world-class comedy and will draw visitors to the area from across London and beyond. But when we're talking about community engagement in particular, we've got an exciting and lively year-round programme of creative engagement. One of our flagship project, for example, is Primary Playwrights, which supports 10 and 11-year-olds to write the first play. We work closely with numerous schools and colleagues in the borough. We team up with professional theatre makers, with the Artists of Tomorrow. We have a variety of labs that support people in the borough, and we have, just general groups linked to our theatre that is made up of alumni who we've met on labs, who've gone on to form their own successful theatre companies and give back to the theatre. And I'm one of the examples of that. I won an Olivier with Soho Theatre. I'm from the borough, and now a lot of the work I do is about continuing to give to the borough and to the theatre. We showcase work that's been created through our engagement programme on our stages. Our creative engagement work helps local people secure work, employment, and helps create local audiences so that when Soho Theatre Walthamstow opens, we are already deeply embedded in the local community. So, really, there is no Soho Theatre West End or Soho Theatre Walthamstow without the community being involved. It's a massive part of our strategy, a massive part of our ethos, and it's a massive part of what makes us so special to our audiences. And it's ultimately the reason for which our tagline at Soho Theatre Walthamstow is a local theatre with a national profile. Of course, we want to be a world-class comedy venue, but we in no way intend to forget the people that make theatre what it is, which is a community.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alessandro. And Michael, I'm aware we're running really short, so can you tell us very briefly a little bit about the project, which is obviously a very careful and sympathetic restoration project, a little bit as the Palace. You're turning a 2,800-seat Sydney Variety House into a 1,000-seat theatre. There are challenges and also opportunities. So can you give us kind of some quick highlight of each?
Yeah, so as you say, remodelling. That introduces opportunities to extend and modernise the building. So, that includes an opportunity to introduce new facilities, a new community suite, essentially, to support the programme of community events that Alessandro was referring to earlier. It gives us the chance to make the building fully accessible. It's a very complex shape, lots of different levels, but we make it fully accessible with lifts. We are able to provide a decent toilet provision, including changing places toilets. And we're able to improve the sustainability considerably by using heat pumps, solar panels, and we managed to achieve a very good BREEAM rating. And in the process, reducing our CO2 emissions by something like 425 tonnes a year. And that's a performance that helped us lever in some finance assistance from the Mayor of London's Energy Efficiency Fund that contributes towards a considerable amount towards the capital spend of the building. And so, yeah, we're very grateful for the support of all our heritage partners, especially the Theatres Trust, Historic England, who also generously contributed with grants, and the GLA for the Mayor of London's Energy Efficiency Fund, for helping us work through some kind of really difficult decisions that protect and maintain as much of the originality as was practicable in modernising the building and giving it a viable life to secure, hopefully, what is a very long and busy future.
It's a fantastic project, and I am really looking forward to seeing it reopened and coming to visit. So thank you so much. And Alessandro, Michael, I'm sorry I had to cut you so short. You know, we had so much to talk about in so limited time. So if there are any questions from anybody in the audience, please do pass them on to us at Theatres Trust, and we'll make sure they go to the relevant people, to Soho Theatre, Walthamstow, and the rest of our panellists today. So I'd just finally like to say thank you to all of our panellists for joining us today and for giving us such exciting visions of their projects. It's been fantastic for Theatres Trust and for me personally to witness the journeys of each and to see them successfully removed from our Theatres at Risk register. So thank you so much. And I'm now going to hand over to John.
Wow, what amazing panelists we've had today. It's so inspiring to hear such amazing examples of people working together, local communities, local authorities, theatre operators, and campaign groups. I hope you found it as inspiring as I have to hear just what can be achieved working together in this way. I'd like to thank all our panellists, to thank Lord Parkinson for his welcome address, to thank our keynote, Barbara Keeley, MP, to thank Tysers for sponsoring us, for sponsoring this event, and to thank you for joining us. Apologies we didn't have time for questions, but do send us any questions you want us to pass on, and we will make sure that they get to the right people. Yeah, get in touch with us if you've been inspired to do more or to do something different, or if you have any queries or you want to be put in contact with any of the people who've spoken today. We'd be happy to help facilitate that. Thank you for joining us, and hope to see you again.